Northern Beaches mums. Hello, beautiful mamas. My name's Annie Littlehales, and I'm a gentle and holistic sleep coach. We're just going to wait a few minutes. I'm joining a little early. I know it can be a difficult time of the night for some people to join, but we are going to get started very shortly. So I just rather send the notification out and make sure you'll have a chance to jump on. I know for some of you, you'll be listening in live, and for those of you who are, hello. And I know this is a little bit of a tricky time of the night for many families. So for those of you who are joining in after the fact, great to be able to connect with you. For any other halves who are either listening in the backgrounds or who are joining us as well, it's great to be able to connect with you. So thanks to the Northern Beaches Mums group as well for the opportunity to share some information about sleep with you all. You know, you might find that some of what I share tonight may be a little bit different to what you've heard before. So I'm very excited to be here and share with you. As I said, my name is Annie. My business is Baby of Mine, and just a few little things I want to cover off as people are just joining. It's great to see people connecting in. Hi, everyone who's just joined. In terms of questions, I would absolutely love to be able to answer questions. So as people are just joining in, if you're connecting here, please know that I really want to get those questions in. Unfortunately, though, this format's not going to be the best for me to get to those questions. So please, will you make sure you pop them in the comments? And depending on how many questions come in and what format they take, I will answer them. Whether it's a video response, whether it's I'll answer them each here on the event page, I will make sure that you're aware. I am conscious that I am starting to chit chat before 8 o'clock. So, but it looks like we kind of have a steady group of you here. We'll just wait a little bit more before we join in. And if you're joining in your PJs, that's good. I was actually even thinking, I was tempted to jump in my PJs and get very relaxed, but I thought that might come across as a bit strange. The other thing I wanted to let you know is, in case you've missed that information, is just about a prize. So I'll just wait for 8 o'clock to click over and then we can really kick in. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that information about a prize, but something fairly chunky on offer, which is great. Okay, so I'm just gonna make sure that anyone from the Northern Beaches teams, that we're all good. I hope you've all been all right in this rain. How nice has this been? Sunshine been though. I had to bring my pest control guy today because I've got these really random little bugs in my laundry due to all the humidity, which is a bit gross, but hope it's all been okay for you. All right, I like to be punctual, so we will dive in. And for those of you who missed the front end, I jumped on a couple of minutes early. My name's Annie. I am so excited to be able to share this time with you and to share some information about sleep with you. So let me tell you about this competition. It is for one lucky prize winner. Sounds like I'm doing bingo. But the prizes on offer are for one winner. And I don't know if you've heard of Holixa, an amazing, gorgeous new women's wellness centre that's opened up in Balgowlah. And I don't know if you've heard about them, but their space is just absolutely gorgeous, as are the team. And they offer a whole range of support services for women with health and wellness, including bar sessions, yoga and Pilates. And they're doing a whole lot more and expanding more. But they have thrown in a 5-pack for their movement sessions. For those of you also, I'm sure most of you would have heard of One-Handed Cooks. They are providing one of their gorgeous cookbooks called Boosting Your Basics, which is really good from baby through to school age. And yours truly, I am putting in a Sleep Connect service and adding in a bonus 30-minute consultation as part of that. So to enter the competition, if you can, there are a few steps just to follow, and one of the beautiful team from the Northern Beaches Mums is actually going to pin a post on this event, so it's all clear. If you miss it, you've needed to step away for a moment. But I have a beautiful Facebook group called the Baby of Mine Sleep Village. That link will be in the pinned post. I'll also double check if I need to check it in there. But step 1, join the Sleep Village. It is no strings attached. It's for parents who value gentle and responsive approaches to sleep and parenting. And first step is join that village. There's a few questions to answer to get in. And then on that, you'll see there's a pinned post which will give you the links to or follow the Holixa and One Handed Cook pages. But there's one other really important thing that I really want you to do in order to enter the competition. And that is, as we go through the session today, I want you to just jot down what your key takeaway, key moment, something you enjoyed into the comments of the event. Okay, so it's joining the village, following Holixa and One Handed Cooks, and sharing your key takeaway. Entries are open till next Monday at midday, and the winner will be randomly selected and announced here and on my social media pages. Please note it is for Northern Beaches people. All right. And also, if you don't want to enter the competition, I'd love to welcome you to the Baby of Mine Sleep Village anyway. But look, let's dive in. I also have a special offer that I do want to give to you all, but I don't want to come across as a bit salesy, because this is not what this session's about. So sleep is really important, isn't it? Yeah, and I think that never do we realize it quite as much until we become parents. And you know, when we have children and we begin to go on that journey of sleep, it can be many things. And some of you may relate to the things I'm about to say. It can be infuriating, it can be exhausting, it can be overwhelming, it can be easy for some people, noted. It can be very confusing, and it can rob us of our joy. And I often talk about this idea of white knuckle parenting, this idea that we're kind of gripping the wheel and just kind of surviving and unsure of where we're going. And that can be really, really challenging. Challenges with sleep can also put pressure on the relationships we have in our family, whether with our other halves or our children, and even beyond that. And it can also be really isolating. Now, I don't want to be presenting this really horrible negative picture of parenthood, right? Because being a parent is mind-blowingly beautiful, and our hearts, it's a common thing. We wonder, how on earth is it possible that we can love so deeply? But when sleep is difficult, it can be very, very hard. And I'm sure each of you are either going through something now, have gone through something. It's difficult, right? So one of my biggest goals when I work with parents one-to-one or in sessions like this or with mothers groups is to lift some of that pressure off your shoulders, right? To alleviate some of the stress, to be able to provide some knowledge that can bring clarity and just make things more calm, more confident. And it's common feedback that I get from parents is this sense of, oh, I feel like a weight's lifted off my shoulders. So today, some of what I say to you may be quite different, maybe, to other stuff that you've heard around sleep. And I find that this can bring two responses. One is, whoa, not quite sure what I think about that. And if you are in that category, then I just ask you to kind of sit with that, sit with information, let it marinate, I suppose, and take from it what you wish, and it may give you some new things to think about. The other response that I often find is people saying, yes, this is exactly, yeah, why do we not hear more of that, right? So just to open up. Now, nothing I say today is under the guise that, hey, just do this and everything's just going to be kind of easy peasy. I'm not here to give you a rapid 5-point success plan to guarantee certain sleep outcomes. I'm not here to tell you to do this and everything's going to be resolved. You know, I don't have some magic bullet solution that I'm hiding and just keeping for myself. So if you are here looking for that kind of approach, then I'm probably going to be a fairly massive disappointment to you. But if you are here to go deeper than all of that, then I think you're going to get a lot out of this. Also, none of what I say should, or really anyone ever says to you, should ever override your instinct as a mama. And sometimes our instincts, I can relate to this too, can get a little bit bruised and battered, and our confidence can get thrown, but it's under there. And I think that that's one of my great joys is working with parents in that way. So what am I going to cover today? I also wanted to let you know that the session is an hour, but I kind of ignored some advice to don't give away too much stuff for free. And I really struggle with that because I just want to give so much information. So we are going to go a little bit over an hour. And if you need to duck off or whatever and want to come back later to the session, then I just wanted to give you a bit extra. So hope that's okay. So we're going to cover off approach to sleep. I want to give you some things to think about, which might be approaches that perhaps you've not considered before, or you didn't even know that there's people that take that approach. I want to talk on the topic of, are all sleep challenges a sleep problem, and are all sleep problems ones that we can fix? We're going to talk about exactness, and that as a bit of a subject, and what are some of the pros, cons, some thoughts around that. And then I want to kind of take us beyond the guides, right? How can we understand sleep deeper than the range of guides that are available and through some of the confusion that can exist? I want to share with you some really powerful information about how sleep actually regulates, and I'm going to relate that back to some really important things that you might be experiencing, whether it's nap transitions, little mini naps, a whole range of things. And finally, we're going to wrap up with 3 sleep myths that I want to talk about. Okay. So, and by the way, I'm looking to the side because I've got notes. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So I hope I'm still feeling well connected to you all. I want to start by telling you a little bit about my approach, because that can serve as a little bit of a springboard for some of the ideas I'd like to share with you as food for thought for your consideration. So I am a proponent of gentle and responsive parenting that is respectful to every aspect of both a child and a family. It's really important to me. Now, I don't typically work with blanket rules. I don't have like this one method approach, except for there is a side of sleep stuff that that's not me. I don't go there. It's not my thing, which are methods that are cry it out, control crying, or really any method that supports firstly a child being left distressed or crying alone, or even feeling that the level of distress just doesn't feel appropriate or respectful to the child or the family. Now, I'm not anti-crying. I am aware that obviously children and little ones will cry when things are a bit different to what they're used to, but I do see time and time again that we can in fact minimize this and even often avoid it if we are able to shift our approach to sleep, both in the way we're supporting their sleep and even our own mindset around sleep. Okay, so I support families who feed to sleep and want to feed to sleep, who want to co-sleep, who want to bed share, who may have floor beds. I support families who want to support their child finding independence with how they're journeying to sleep. But it's all part of a bigger picture of truly understanding every detail of a child and identifying what works best for each child. Okay, so sleep can be really polarizing too, right? It seems that there are 2 sides of the spectrum, and I'm sure many of you have seen conversations even right here on the beautiful Northern Beaches Mums group and other parenting forums or your mothers groups, where it can get a little heated, right? In terms of, on one end of the spectrum, we have parents that want to take an approach of, let's normalize sleep, let's just go with the flow. They're not young forever, and parents are happy to really go with the flow and let sleep take its natural course without, interventions and so on. And if that's working for a family and a parent and that suits baby and all, then fantastic, go for it. It wasn't where I kind of ended up, but I think it's really important to note that I completely respect and love that there's that end and that people are there. We also then have on the other end of this spectrum a more sleep training approach, right? And so again, you've probably seen these conversations and the debates that go on. And really it's more program-based. Let's fix the problematic sleep. There's a really big focus on independence in getting to sleep as a key outcome. And there's a focus that if you kind of wait too long to do this, it's going to get worse. And by doing it early, you can avoid future problems. And I often call this the brace yourself approach. Yeah. And even people that talk about some of the techniques that are used kind of refer to the idea that you need to really be able to stomach it in a way and be tough and push through. Now, please know I absolutely acknowledge there are very gentle methods that are also used where a parent is present and so on, but there is still the focus, the golden standard is that the child must fall asleep independently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that moving further on. So there's these two ends and I sit in the middle. And I think it surprises a lot of parents to know that there actually is a middle ground, right? And people that usually come to me for support don't really fit either end. This doesn't suit them, that doesn't suit them, but there is nearly the sense of, well, what do I do? If this is what people are telling me is what's going to fix sleep, surely that's what I need to do. And so in part of talking about an approach, I want to give you some consideration about what can this middle ground actually look like? Because sometimes people are a little bit surprised that it does exist if they've never come across people that support sleep in this way. So in a nutshell, we can do so much gently to understand and optimize our children's sleep. There's loads of stuff that we can do, right? We can look to remove roadblocks that might be in their way when it comes to sleep. But we can do this with a very clear and deep knowledge when it comes to infant and child sleep development, right? So we can ensure that we are not only evidence-based, but that we're also realistic. And we also do not need to assume that all babies must, should, can sleep in the same way. And it's where we can work sensitively around that so we can understand all the things that impact our little one's sleep, whether that's their sensory profile, whether that's their temperament, their personality, their physical health, respect to everyone's mental health. What are their individual sleep needs? What are the family dynamics? What are the logistics of the family? You know, is it there's 4 kids, 1 kid? Has there been trauma? What's happening in life in general? What's happening developmentally? All of these things, feeding, there's so much that influences sleep. So we can approach sleep with a very aware approach of how all of these things, and that's where the holistic comes in, right? Impact sleep, and recognizing that that may mean that every baby is going to have all their own little variations. So we might find that one baby is really okay with finding sleep independently, even very young. They are supported in a way and they just seem to go with it, and it works great for them. We might find another baby who doesn't respond to this at all. And so the question is, you know, what happens when we just try to bang away at the same approach, because there is this sense of this is what fixes sleep and this is the gold standard, that once we do this, all sleep is improved, right? So what happens when we assume that's the only or best outcome for successful sleep? So I can share with you that I work with parents who breastfeed to sleep and their babies are consolidating their sleep at night. And I have parents that come to me who their child is self-settling, not self-soothing. That's totally different. Babies that cannot self-soothe in the developmental sense. But then they're waking lots in the night, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we move on. But coming back to the approach, if we can see that sleep, there's so much more to the journey of sleep, even just, I'll say it again, there's so much more to the journey of sleep than just how they get to sleep, right? It's a whole big picture here. In this approach, in this middle ground, we can also normalize night waking, right? We refer to evidence on this, but we also ensure we leave no stone unturned to do everything we can to support their sleep and to understand their sleep. we can ensure that we're also working on practical strategies to protect everyone's sleep. So it's not this idea that we're sorting out babies' sleep. We're looking at it in that big picture. And this is the middle zone. This is a zone that I find I really love being in. And as I talk more through this, you might find that it just speaks to you about another way or another approach, or you might kind of already be in that zone and this is something that you're really keen on and you just want to find out a little bit more and go deeper there. Okay. One of the challenges sometimes is those two ends of the spectrum I spoke about can be a little bit more black and white, right? Because there's method and there's approach, whereas here it's kind of saying, well, there's lots and lots of different ways we can do things within a certain framework. Okay. Before I go on, I just want to quickly share with you some research that I'm doing. If you, this is specifically for parents with children from 0 to 18 months old, but I know that there are some people joining with younger babies. And those of you who are on here with older babies will know other people with younger babies. I'm currently doing some research, particularly with mums of babies from 0 to 6 months old who are potentially feeling a bit anxious about sleep. They're feeling a bit overwhelmed. They do value a gentle and responsive approach. I will drop a link in the comments around this. I'm looking to interview more mums in this position, and the upside is I spend time with them, giving them personalised guidance on what's happening in their particular situation with their baby. So I guess my question is, if any of you there are keen, I would love to interview and give you some guidance. If there's anyone you can share that information with, I would be so grateful. It's really some important research that I'm doing to enhance a new service that I'll be bringing out. Okay, back to where we were up to. So we've talked a little bit about this approach to sleep and where this middle zone is, and it might just give you, as I said, some food for thought of what that looks like. I hope you can't hear a buzzing. I have this random massive bug that has decided to appear, so I will try not to do random karate chops, but hopefully it doesn't land on my head or something. Anyway, so let's move on. How do we define sleep problems? Are all sleep challenges a sleep problem? And can we fix all sleep problems? What I mean by that will be made a little bit more clearer when I talk about the two sides of sleep. And this is, I talk about this with every single family I work with, because I think it is so important as a foundational piece of knowledge when we are trying to go deeper with our understanding of sleep. So I say that there's a side of sleep where we can aim to fix by tweaking, adjusting, reviewing, monitoring, adjusting, right? And I look at this side as an analogy of, if you had an iron deficiency, you would definitely want to be going to get medical support, find out what's happening and fix it, right? Absolutely, make sure it's fixed. And there is a side of sleep where there are things that we do work on with an aim to fix a problem. So if I see that there's clear cues that a child is really undertired at the times when mum or dad are trying to get bub to sleep, by making those changes, I'm aiming to try to fix that problem, right? However, there is another side of the sleep stuff, which are the impacts to sleep that occur due to development or emotional changes that are occurring in that little one's life, where I have to be honest with you in that some of those impacts that occur are not things that we can actually fix. And it's, as I said, it's not the most popular message, but it's the truth. So let me use this as an analogy, and we're going to go more into this. But for those of you who have older children, toddlers, preschoolers, or you've had relationship with children that age, we know, for example, that there is a very normal developmental stage that many toddlers and preschoolers go through, which is those big feelings that they can't regulate, those explosions, those tantrums, and they're really, really difficult. But we wouldn't go to our pediatrician and say, you know, these tantrums, can we just fix this? Like, can you give me a prescription? What do I need to do to stop, to fix them? We just wouldn't do that, because we understand that tantrums are a very normal developmental stage. Now, I'm not saying what happens with sleep are tantrums. I'm just using this as an analogy to say there are certain stages that our children do go through whereby sleep is impacted. where we cannot actually fix what's happening. I hope I haven't shocked you all too much. I'm looking if the numbers have just gone to zero. But I want to delve into this, right? Because what can be very hard is understanding causality. How much of what's happening with your child's sleep that's a challenge is part of the problem, part of this side where it can be fixed, and how much of it is the other side which can't be fixed. And that's where it can get very confusing. As a parent in particular, that's when you might start to search for some answers. So there are two important things that I would like you to consider when you are looking for the answer, whatever that is, if it's through your own avenues, through some support. Okay, so firstly, part of that is what happens with development and sleep. Now, I know that it's not news to any of you that development impacts sleep, right? You've heard of leaps and regressions and all of those things. I tend to steer away from the word regression, not as a word play, but simply because in a clinical sense, the word regression actually means the loss of a previously acquired skill. And that's really not at all what's happening with sleep. It can also tend to have a bit of a negative connotation. And I think that sometimes it can be helpful just to remember the flip side, that there's some pretty unbelievable things going on with our child. You know, one day they can't take a step. The next minute they take a step. You know, that moment your baby looked up at you and just smiled. All of these things that occur. So there is that flip side of remembering that despite there can be some absolutely crappy stages with how development impacts sleep, there's a beautiful flip side as well. So what we know is when babies do go through physical, social, emotional, verbal and language, speech development, it is very normal for their sleep at night in particular to become fragmented. Right? There's a lot of work the brain does in the night. And every baby is going to be different. Some are more affected by this, some seemingly unaffected. So there's a big wide range of normal of how children are affected. So firstly, we know that their sleep can be affected by simply what's happening in their brain due to development. But secondly, sometimes as they go through these developments, they just need a little bit more connection and nurture. And I'd suggest that's pretty valid, right? Depending on your view. So I'm sure many of you would have seen impacts of development with your kids' sleep. And I'm going to use one example that probably all of you have gone through, and it's like one of the most dreaded ones. You probably know even what I'm thinking about. If you've got a 6-month-old and above, you've gone through it. The 4-month regression, right? I will call it that because it's what everyone tends to call it, right? But I want to use this as an example to illustrate what I'm talking about so we can go deeper here. Let's not forget that around 4 months, there's a lot of other development happening, right? There's a whole cascade of development. We also know that when we look at the evidence, there's often a slight dip in sleep needs in a 24-hour period around that time. But somewhere between 1 and 6 months, often around that 4-month mark, we know there is a massive change in the architecture of their sleep cycle, right? And for those of you who have learned about that, you would know a newborn has 2 phases of sleep. They start in REM sleep, rapid eye movement, and then they go into non-REM sleep. If you remember those weird twitchy eye movements and all of that in REM, and then going into that more still sleep. They also would spend about 50% of that sleep cycle equally in each of those phases. Now, again, somewhere between 1 and 6 months begins the maturation of that sleep cycle, where they sleep like you or I. 3 phases of non-REM sleep and then into REM sleep. Now, this is a completely different way for their brain and body to process sleep. And it can really fragment. I don't know, some of you might have gone through it, waking every 45 minutes in the night, and some children just kind of breeze through it. So what if we have a baby, 4.5-month-old, is now waking 8, 10 times in the night? Is this a sleep challenge? Absolutely. No one in their right mind would want to be up 8 to 10 times in the night. Like, let's be absolutely authentic here. But is it a sleep problem? And is it one that we can fix? So Can we make their sleep cycle mature faster? No. Can we do, fix what's happening with their sleep cycle? We can't. And does that, however, mean that there's nothing we can do? No, it doesn't mean that. And this is where some of you, or in other situations, we hear this idea of you should fix it by teaching your child to self-settle. That's a whole other presentation there. And like I said, I'll comment on that a bit later. But this is where the middle ground then comes in, is saying, look, this is really, really hard, mama. Okay. Let's understand what is happening. Let's look at the evidence. Let's gain the knowledge so that we can just panic a little less, have a little less overwhelm, right? Let's work out what might be contributing to make it worse. Is there anything we could do differently just to optimize, just to support as we like? The analogy, remember, again, not saying these are tantrums, but with tantrums where we walk alongside our little one as they move through a developmentally normal stage of their sleep development. Yeah. And let's create a plan that suits your baby and your family to best support everyone's sleep as you move through this. But I'll tell you what can make it infinitely worse when, as parents, we're going through things with our child where developmentally there are impacts to sleep. What can make it infinitely worse is the stress or the pressure that everything your baby or child is going through is actually something that can be fixed. So it surprises people sometimes to hear this, but I was speaking to a lady in one of my research interviews this week. She was saying, I wish actually more people would say that, because it's not the typical thing, right? We kind of given this idea that do this and everything is fixed. But I really rather you have the truth here and understanding and being equipped with this knowledge, because that is a very heavy burden as a parent to wear, right? That if you haven't fixed it, you've done something wrong, you failed, or there's something wrong with your baby. And I really don't think that that's fair on anyone or helpful. So when we come to this idea of are all sleep challenges a problem to be fixed, we can see, or can you see, that perhaps there's times that we're being burdened with pressures that are really not fair to us or our babies. Just some food for thought, right? There's many, many approaches with sleep out there. And I can only truly be authentic to what I see in the research, what I see in the evidence, and what I see in working with babies and children. And I find that parents that are trying to find solutions at either end of the spectrum, and it's just not working for them, but understanding how much developmental impacts can influence sleep can make things so much easier in the bigger picture, right? So I said there was two things that I want you to just have a think about as you consider looking for an answer when you are going through sleep challenges. So I've talked about the idea of we can't dismiss developmental impacts to sleep. We can't say that we can fix everything. Like I can't fix separation anxiety. I can't fix that your baby's rolling and things have gone a bit haywire. I can't fix all these other things that influence sleep. The second thing that I want to look at, and so I will say there are things we can do to support them. I really want to make sure that's clear. I'm not saying throw your hands up and don't do anything. We do lots, but within that framework. So the second thing is, when we're considering getting an answer, is how are we even measuring or defining the problem? There are general rules that exist that unfortunately are often not evidence-based, that then define something as a problem that's actually not a problem for our baby, but suddenly it's a problem for mum. So the way the very problem is defined and measured then nearly creates a problem. And I put it to you that this can make it very, very challenging and more stressful than it needs to be. So particularly when those measures and definitions aren't based in evidence. So I'm going to give you an example, a real life example here that ties together a little bit about what I'm talking about here when it comes to what happens when we take off the table the developmental impacts to sleep, and what happens when we're using measures that aren't evidence-based. Let's have a look. So I wanted to use an example that you've probably all gone through. Some of you with younger babies may still be going through this, and those of you with older children, I would say not. But again, it's something that helps illustrate for all of you in a way that makes sense. Let's look at the single nap cycle. I feel like I should kind of have dun 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 music, because they can be really frowned upon, right? The single nap cycle. Have you come across that? I know it is very common. A lot of parents come to me with this idea that they've been told single cycle naps are really bad, right? So let's have a look at developmentally. Between the age of 5 to 6 months, those of you with older kids, maybe you can remember, those of you who are going through it now, there is a stage where even despite everything we do right or perfect, some children will just sleep in a single nap cycle. And again, there's lots we can do to optimize their opportunity for the nap to extend. Potentially there's roadblocks in the way that is creating this. But the knowledge that it's a common stage can be very, very powerful. But we need to very much look at the individual babies here too, right? So let's use the example. I'm just going to keep it really simple, okay? 2 babies who are doing 3 one-cycle naps in the day. And each nap might be 30 to 40 minutes. So the information that a lot of mums are given about a one-cycle nap, it's a hard thing. I wish I could ask you, what have you been told? What have you heard? But this is the conversations I have all the time. So what I hear and I see is that mums are told this equals a bad sleep. You need to fix it so it's longer. It's not restorative. I'll talk about that a bit later. And you're failing to give your baby what they need, and baby will be overtired and impacts to development. Now, of course, no one says all that, but let's face it, that's where a lot of those pressures, this is what mums are telling me they feel about some of this stuff. So what if we look at the actual signs and patterns for both of these babies? Remember, 3 one-cycle naps, about 30 to 40 minutes each. So what are we going to look at? All right, how is Bub when they wake up in the morning? What's the flow of their day like? What are they like when they wake up from each of these naps? Yeah. What's their journey to sleep like? How are they as their day progresses? What are they like in the lead up to bedtime? What are they like in those few hours shortly after going to bed, through the night, early hours, in the morning? What's the parent's gut feel on the flow of this day, right? And how do their overall sleep volumes compare to the evidence-based recommendations when it comes to sleep? How is Bob in general? Okay. These are just some of the things that we can look into for clues and signals with what's happening, to go deeper than the idea of blanket rule, one-cycle nap. So what if baby number 1 wakes up pretty chipper in the morning, they're just fine, they're happy, their day is flowing well, they're a pretty settled bubby, they wake from their naps, I think I already said, fairly in a good mood, overall sleep volume is great, and the pattern is working really well for this baby. But what about this mum who is then trying to fix this thing, this one-cycle nap that is actually not broken for her baby? You know, what's that going to do to her head space? What's that going to do for her heart space? And what's her inner dialogue going to be when baby wakes up from another 30-minute nap? How am I going to fix this? What am I doing wrong, right? There is a lot of thought process that can go on here. Now, the generalized information she's been given isn't actually based on evidence, and potentially ignores all the other information her baby's reflecting. So suddenly a challenge, because let's face it, single cycle naps can be very challenging as a parent. You feel like you don't get a chance to breathe. But suddenly the sleep challenge is now defined as a sleep problem, and one that she needs to fix. So what would it be like if, for this mama, we helped her recognize, and I get goosebumps when I talk about this, because this is the stuff that gets me really excited to talk about sleep. Because these are the parents that I talk to, and despite all these other signs, because of this rule or guide that's told them a single cycle nap is bad, they're feeling really broken by it. So what if we did support her in a way that helped her recognize that the flow of sleep is actually working really well for her baba? What if we were able to show her evidence to support this? What if she could get a sense that actually her baby is sleeping 12 hours in a 24-hour period and it's just perfect for him and it's a normal range, and another baby might be doing a totally different nap pattern, but when we look at all the other signs, it's okay. It really does break my heart that there is all this pressure and some of it just doesn't make any sense. So what if then we look at to baby number 2, okay, same nap pattern, and we might find actually for that baby, yeah, this is really not flowing well at all for them. You know, they're showing signs it's not enough sleep and looking at all those other signs and clues. And then, of course, then we're going to make some changes, and we might find that those changes have a really great impact. Or we might even need to alter some of the expectations that have been created that, for example, you can only resettle in their cot, don't make eye contact, you know, don't pick them up. Well, it could be, hey, it's okay, pick baby up. Do what you need to just to help them get that little bit of extra sleep. It's okay. We might need to alter some of the expectations as well. And how do we support a family that where bub, no matter what we do, just is continuing with this cycle? So how do we just create a space where we can walk alongside our child as they move through it? And as I said, mamas, I know this is a hard message. I don't know how it's being received by you, but I really rather you be given honest, truthful, real information that reduces pressure and helps the situation realistically and practically, rather than lumping all sleep challenges into a problem that you've got to fix. You've got to get help to fix that, right? Because again, if we lump them all together as a sleep problem, we can really be making the relationship with sleep so much harder than it needs to be. So what can we do? In this middle ground, what might that look like? Firstly, we hold firm to the knowledge that sleep development is non-linear, right? There's often this expectation that, well, they were sleeping like this, and so they should sleep like this and should sleep like that. But it's often not the case, right? So we really need to hold firm to that, because that can help reduce some of the panic if things are shifting or changing. Secondly, we can get really empowered to truly understand what normal infant, child and sleep development looks like really important knowledge. What are the ranges of the normal? What are the signs and clues to look for? So we're less likely to be trying to fix problems that are not the one, they're kind of normal stuff that we need to get equipped with how to walk alongside. Thirdly, we try not to let fear take over, right? Now, what I mean by that, I don't mean it to sound all wishy-washy and esoteric, but I often get parents that we can feel so scared that we're going to create bad habits that we're nearly paralyzed to be responsive to what is the changing needs of our baby. And it's always obviously with the best intentions. We don't want to make it harder for our child by creating bad habits. But, imagine if you had a friend and they didn't want to hear out a problem you're having, right? Despite you having a real need right now for someone to support you. Now, what if they said, well, look, you didn't have this need last week. Why should I give it this week? Before I know it, anytime you need some support, you're going to be turning to me. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying it, and yes, I'm being a tad cheeky, but it just is something to think about, right? This idea that rather than thinking about it that we're giving in or being weak or we're setting bad habits, could we possibly reframe that? Could we consider what a wonderful expectation, what a wonderful habit for our child to know that as parents, we are going to be responsive with boundaries, with clarity, with an approach that suits our family, but we are going to be attuned and responsive and nurturing, and we're strong and we're informed. This is not about weakness and giving in and, just whatever. And that's what I mean. It's so important that we know. I'm not saying we don't have a clear approach, but often we get afraid of being stuck. If we kind of lean in, we're going to be stuck. But I promise you there are ways to respectfully and gently lean in and also be able to lean out. And in fact, by doing that, we're less frightened of the leaning in because it doesn't feel like we're doing something terrible. In fact, we're doing something quite beautiful and amazing. Because, if we can recognize that the journey of sleep is non-linear, right? And some babies it's going to be really loopy and some children less. But if we can recognize that, then surely isn't it equally as valid to say that our support doesn't need to be linear as well? I think that's an interesting thing to think about. So just to recap there, we hold firm to the knowledge that sleep development is non-linear. We get empowered to really understand what normal, sleep development looks like. We try not to let fear take over, but we need a clear approach, right? Now, I really wrestled with this idea of, do I go in and say, here's tips and steps and guides? I want to go deeper than that. So I've kind of called this session, Let's Go Deep on Sleep. Because there's a myriad of things out there, tips and guides and all of that. I want to go under that. I want to talk about that more broadly. And, if you want that kind of stuff, the Sleep Village is there. There's other avenues for that. Like I said, I wanted to go under that. So yes, we can be responsive. We can have a clear and considered approach. We can get a really clear view on exactly what's happening with our child's sleep, what's working, what's not. Use evidence-based information so that it is all clear on what we can optimize and what is in the way. And also what changes might be needed to their overall sleep hygiene, the flow of their day, the distribution of their naps, what's working well for them. Is the nap routine really rushed? Is bedtime a bit frantic? What's going on there? And we ensure we do all of this with a complete respect for the uniqueness of each child and family, right? And this has to fit in with your family, whatever approach you take to support your child's sleep. But also it needs to, and I feel like I'm telling you needs to, but I think it's so important that we also recognize what baby responds to. Yeah. So making sure that we can be responsive, but still have our parenting boundaries. If you're a feeding parent, absolute respect for bodily autonomy, but that we can consider options. Okay. What is in that middle ground? I remember I had this really lovely conversation with a dad probably a couple of months ago now. We were talking about what was happening with his 16-month-old. And we were just having a little chat. He hadn't booked in yet. And I said, well, is the co-sleeping working? I mean, you don't have to change that. And he, what? I can co-sleep? And I was like, yeah, well, if it's working well for you as a family, like there's some other things I can see that are kind of getting in her way, but if that's working well for you as a family, you don't have to change it. And I wish I could have actually had him on a Zoom, because I kind of picture what his face must have looked like. But that might be an option. Do you want to co-sleep? Maybe you want to keep feeding to sleep and see some other things that you want to work on, right? Do you, though, want to take an opportunity to help your child find sleep independently? So I mentioned I would make a few comments on this earlier, and I just want to hover on this point, this idea of independence with sleep. And just excuse me a minute while I take a sip. Now, before I jump into that, I forgot to mention that I want to give you all a little special offer. If you are finding that I'm your person, I'm a fit for you with giving you some support, I have a few different sleep packages and services that I provide. But any one of you that does want some one-to-one support and you do want to book in, for anyone that books in before Friday night this week, I'm going to throw in an extra half-hour video consultation with me, which is valued at around $60. So this isn't about me trying to push my services, but I do want to just give a bit of love and say, for any of you that do want to book by Friday night, I will throw that in on top of what I believe are some really lovely service packages for you. So, okay, let's come back to this idea that independence with sleep. I'm just going to give you a few things to point out. And I better hurry up a little bit too. So firstly, do you know that not every child is coupled with the relationship between how they journey to sleep is not always coupled with what they need in the night. Like I said earlier, I have parents that breastfeed to sleep and Bubby's consolidating night sleep. I have parents that child is settling independently, happily at bedtime, but this doesn't reflect what's happening in the night. So firstly, we have to accept that not every child is coupled tightly with how they journey to sleep and the support they need to get back to sleep. And that's not a common message that's shared. There's this assumption that all children, once this happens, well, ta-da, it just fixes it, right? So that's really important. We have to put on the table what's biologically normal too, right? If we look at the history of sleep training and approaches with sleep, and even approaches to the psychology of children and how to support children, understanding babies, their needs and everything, it is a fascinating history. I really geek out on this stuff, but we haven't always done sleep the way we do. That's real. That's like the truth. So this is where this middle ground is, that there is an element of what's biologically normal for children to have close contact, to journey to sleep. But the reality is also that we live in a society that doesn't always fit. Unfortunately, fortunately, however you look at it, whether it's progress or not, that sometimes it becomes very unsustainable for parents, right? And particularly if there's a child that is heavily coupled with what's happening in the night and it's just feeling very unsustainable. So then we can look at how can we support a child, but it doesn't have to be this quick 7-10 day program, wham bam, smash it out approach either. There's so much we can do. And part of it is also just taking off the pressure. There's so much pressure on really young babies with this. Again, some of them, they have a temperament that's open to it and others don't. So having this one size, one way for all babies, despite everything, I would just question whether, how does that sit for you, right? We also know that not every baby is going to accept this. We'll get some children that, as I said, have a temperament. They go with that. They're okay with it. And others, they need a whole lot of time to adjust to this with a whole lot of different steps. And there are some babies that just will not be okay with it. They need the contact to journey to sleep. They need that closeness, or the parents want that, right? So again, we have to recognize that even, sometimes have a parent say, I really want my child to fall asleep independently. And I have to say, look, it's great how we want them to sleep, but they each have their own way as well. So I can't guarantee this is going to be where they're going to head, right? But again, we give opportunities, we look at all the other things. But it's just, I think, a very important part of the conversation. And so this is why I believe this middle zone is so powerful, right? Because it's not saying this is the way you bang it out regardless, and that every child needs this, every child can do it, and that it's the holy grail of sleep. Okay, so coming back to this clear approach, is it an avenue you want to explore? Do you want to stay in their room and give them some cuddles rather than getting in their bed? Maybe you're cool with comfort feeds through the night. Some people, they're not okay with that, and it's okay. We've got to work around what is okay for a family. Are you going to have a period of time where you might camp out in their room? Maybe your baby, they do much better when they're supported to sleep in their sleep space. Some children really actually push away. My oldest was like that. I don't want to be held. Put me down. Listen to what I'm communicating, and being there and supporting, but listening to our child. And it doesn't have to be the one way or the one way all the time. There are many, many gentle options. So whatever you do, also know the important thing is that you don't have to keep it that way, right? It's not saying that if you do this, that you're going to have to do this all the time. As I said, there's ways we can lean in and lean out. But I do find that having this clear approach and recognizing all the nuances of sleep, it does help parents feel more calm, feel more consistent, and that we're more likely to support our child in more predictable ways rather than sleep kind of getting dragged out or becoming very upsetting and negative and stressful for everyone. So remember, we're talking here about, are all sleep challenges a problem? So can we see that potentially if we are not acknowledging, remember I said the two things for the answers, firstly, the impact of development, right? And also that we're using measures and definitions that nearly ignore a lot of the other clues that we see about a child's sleep, and often those are not evidence-based. We can see that we're potentially making it, again, far more difficult than it needs to be. Now, you might be thinking, hold on, Annie, this feels really like grey, faffy. Doesn't feel clear to me. It doesn't feel exact. Like, why aren't you covering specific, exact guidance for me to follow to fix my child's sleep. Where are those 5 quick tips? And as I said, I did wrestle with that, but I really want to go deeper than that. But let's have a talk about exactness. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm running overtime. So if you need to go, but I don't want to miss out on sharing this information with you. So if you need to go, I know it's late as we get close to 9 o'clock. And if you want to come back to this, I apologize. I practice this to be an hour, but sometimes life gets in the way in terms of the speed at which we get through things. So but if you do need to go at 9 o'clock, can I please remind you before I go into this next point that the competition, there's a pinned post as to how to enter. Get on the Sleep Village. Share your key takeaway in the comments I should say it the way. First, share your comments on your key takeaway or moment from this session in the event comments. Get onto the Baby of Mine Sleep Village and follow Holixa and One Handed Cooks, and do all of that by midday this coming Monday. Don't forget, I'm seeking out some interviewees for research. They're the 6-month-olds. They get great feedback from me in the sessions with some guidance. And don't forget the offer, if you do want to book in for some one-to-one support, by Friday night, anyone who books, I'll be giving an extra 30 minutes consultation, which, as I said, is valued at about $60. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? No, I want to just keep talking about giving you info. So exactness. So exactness is so nice. It can be so nice. And as I was saying, it can feel like, well, where's the clarity? How do I know exactly what I need to then do to support my child's sleep? And you know what? When we're tired and when we're overwhelmed and when we're frustrated, it is so attractive to be given exactness, right? And there are benefits to exactness. I absolutely want to be authentic about that. There are here exact steps to follow. Here you go. Here's your specific routine. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Here is your precise plan. In fact, follow this and everything will be fixed. You know, an unpredictable life with a baby can be very hard. Those of you who are in the younger age bracket, you might be in that. Those of you in the older, you kind of pass that a little bit. And please know, yes, there are times that we do need to be very specific, but let's have a look at benefits of exactness, right? Sometimes there's an immediate sense of calm when we're given an exact set of instructions. It can nearly help us feel like, okay, if I just do this, I will get an outcome, right? The sense that we've been given the right thing to do. And sometimes, in fact, that very calm can help us dial down. I mean, in terms of our own regulation. And sometimes that naturally just has this really positive flow on into the relationship with sleep. Having exact steps can be very easy when we're tired and we don't I don't want to think, I don't want to use my judgment, my confidence is being battered. Just tell me what to do and I'll do that. Yeah. And you know what? For some babies, it works. I'm seeing the numbers drop off. I know. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to keep to time, everybody. Please know I understand exactness, the draw for exactness. Pre-kids, I used to head up a project management office, and I am someone that really struggled into my entry with parenthood. You know, like, what do you mean? I don't know when they're going to sleep, how long they're going to sleep for. How do I know? How do I plan? What do I do? Right. And so I really do understand. The thing is that there are some really difficult aspects to sleep approach and being exactness. And for any of you that are struggling, I'm not saying it's a switch on off thing. There's a process involved here, but exactness tends to be quite binary, right? You've done it right or you've done it wrong. It's good, bad, success, fail. There's really no in between. So if one thing goes off plan, potentially the whole day is ruined, and it can lead to this real cascade of thought processes around and feelings around, oh my gosh, it's a bad day. It's crap. It's a complete write-off now. The rest of the day is bad. Now the night's bad. Now this is always going to be like this. I'm never going to sleep again in my life. You know, this whole understanding. So exactness can be hard in that way. Exactness also doesn't leave much, if any, room for adapting and being responsive and pivoting, right, to the various needs of our child. Exactness also tends to assume that, particularly when it comes to sleep, that all babies sleep the same way. And it can potentially ignore the influences of both sleep physically and emotionally. So it could mean that we're missing some important signs there, okay? So I was going to refer to a study. I'll put the link in just so I'm not taking too much time on that. But at a high level, there is research, and also just anecdotally, I find that for many, many mums who are trying to follow strict time-based guides and routines around sleep and feeding, I find for many, many of those parents, the very exactness that is meant to bring calm and confidence and clarity can actually lead to feeling nearly trapped by the schedule. This sense of the strictness brings about a lot of sense of failure. But for some mums, it works fantastically. So if you found something that's working great for you, then wonderful. But what I find is there are many mums who come to me with this sense that they feel like they have failed. There's something wrong with their baby. There's something wrong with them. They're not doing it right, or they've not found the right routine or right guide. And if only they could find it, it would be life-changing. Yeah. What I find is when we can find this balance between having structure, right? So it doesn't feel completely loosey-goosey and chaotic, but we also have flex, right? Where we can really pivot and respond and adapt. This is where I find parents say, oh, I feel so relieved. Like there's a sense of freedom that comes in that. There's a sense of greater calm. And so when I talk about what's evidence-based and not, what's really interesting is to note how some of the things we're measuring with sleep and some of the rules we're making, they're just not based in evidence, right? I was going to use an example, but I'll move on because I think I want to keep going there. So what if we go deeper than the guides and the charts and the, routine programs and this and that? What if we're supported in a way that helps you find that freedom in that middle zone that I keep talking about? And the question really comes down to, if you are in this zone where you are struggling with exactness and this tension of, I want to be exact, but I want to be responsive, I want to adapt, but I need a guide, tell me what to do. Is it working for you? Really, that's what it comes down to. Is it empowering you? Is it making life less stressful? Is it making things easier? Is it helping you in the way you support your little one's sleep? And if so, then great. But if not, maybe you might want to consider a different approach. Because when we talk about going beyond the guides and the programs, did you know that actually awake guides and any guide that tells you exactly how many naps and the length of nap for each nap and everything is actually not based in evidence? I know I keep banging on about this, but I think it's so important. And yeah, we can see patterns, but this is probably why when people say, well, this guide says this and this guide says that and this guide says that, right? It can really throw people. So in fact, the only research that is available when we look at the flow of sleep is how much sleep in an overall 24-hour period. So you might want to grab a pen if you're listening to this, and you might want to write this down. Now, some guides and plans have ranges, which is wonderful, fantastic. But others are very prescriptive and exact and make it quite challenging in that sense. So what does the evidence show when it comes to overall sleep in a 24-hour period? All right, I'm happy I can drop the links to the citations for this research. 4 to 11-month-olds, right, between 4 and 11-month-olds, the recommendation is 12 to 15 hours of overall volume of sleep. Now, please note, this does not assume continuous sleep at night, okay? Unless your child is waking for really long periods, we don't need to deduct these night wakings that are occurring. In fact, that's one of the problems sometimes when we're tracking feeds and we start the feed, it clocks off that there's sleep happening. So 4 to 11 months, we're looking at 12 to 15 hours. And then 1 to 2 years, you're looking at about 11 to 14 hours of sleep. Okay, so just to put this in context, someone who's listening to this, you might have a 1-year-old, right? And they may only need 10 hours of sleep in the night, yeah, and 1 hour of sleep in the day, maybe across 1 or 2 naps. 10 hours at night, right? We kind of use this Western view, 8 to 6, 1 hour in the day. Another one of you mums might have a bub that needs 11 hours overnight, and they break out their sleep into the day into 3 hours that might be across a couple of naps. 3 hours, 1 hour, 10 hours, 11 hours. Like, it's a big difference. And if we think about that, the both of these are actually in the range of normal, and if it's working well for bub, that's what we look at, right? Look at all the things that influence sleep and see, is this working for my baby? But it's so important to use the correct evidence when we are measuring and understanding sleep. So I actually do use an awake guide for my clients. I use it as a reference point, and I always tell them that we look at all the other stuff, and that's one small piece of the picture. Because it can be helpful, right, to have something, particularly if you're a new mum or you're starting out, like, I don't know, I've got no idea. But I do recommend a two-pronged approach, right? So if you have a guide, then consider all the other stuff, and your child may be way outside that guide and still be totally fine. Depends on all the other signs. So again, if you want to jot this down, the kind of numbers that I give parents as a starting point, and again, please in context, is around 5 to 7 months, you might be looking at about 2.5 to 3 hours. 8 to 13 months, you might be looking at about 3 to 4 hours. And then as we get into that zone of the 14 months to 3 years, around 5 to 6 hours. But please also note, this really depends on when they're transitioning with naps, right? So a baby that transitions to a nap much earlier than others, of course, it's going to be a completely different flow of their day, right? So 2.5 to 3 hours for that 5 to 7 month mark. 8 to 13 months, you're looking at the 3 to 4 hours, and then 14 months to 3 years, around 5 to 6 hours. So it's good to know, but it's one part of the equation, right? Remembering also some children are going to be higher sleep needs and some are going to be lower sleep needs, and still in the range of normal. In fact, when you actually look at the evidence, even above and below these ranges can be still deemed as appropriate. Okay. So in terms of naps as well, some of you who in that younger range, 6-month-olds, you might be on even 3 or 4 naps. Some of you might already be on 2 naps. It really does vary. I do find that many children, anecdotally speaking, are usually transitioned to 2 naps by about 9 months, but there's always going to be outliers. And then the shift to 1 nap, I find, is commonly somewhere between 11 and 18 months. It's a really big range, and there's so many things that help us understand that. All right, now I'm just having a little think on the go here. You know what? I'm just going to give this all to you. I hope the Northern Beaches Mums page doesn't mind that I'm going over time. I'm going to just lay it all out there. So I really want to give you some information on how sleep regulates, and then talk to you about why this is important. How can you use this information? Okay, very high level and very condensed. Sleep is regulated by 2 processes in the body. Okay, one is homeostatic sleep pressure, and one is the circadian rhythm. Homeostatic sleep pressure is also just known as tiredness or sleep pressure. You've probably heard about it in those ways. Let's look at what regulates day sleep, because this might surprise some of you based on some of the other things you may have seen. Day sleep is regulated by sleep pressure. That's what regulates day sleep. Sleep pressure rises as Bub is awake. The body has signals that occur and changes that occur to trigger, hey, we need sleep. The purpose of the nap is to take off part of that sleep pressure. But in fact, we also want sleep pressure to keep building through the day, through to bedtime and the night. So let's use a quick example. 3 hours, a child is awake, and it used to be that they would sleep about an hour and a half, and suddenly they're like taking a lot longer to fall asleep. There's a bit of resistance even as you're starting to get them ready for their nap. The support they need is suddenly a lot more. It's just really shifted, and then they might just wake at 45 minutes, but refreshed, like not, I want more sleep. So when we understand that tiredness and sleep pressure regulates day sleep, we might be able to read into these, and I'm giving a very quick little example. Obviously, there's a bigger picture here. To say, well, if previously their resilience was such that the 3 hours led to a nap of an hour and whatever I said it was, and now we're feeling like they're kind of showing this resistance, which could very well be under tiredness, and now the nap is shorter. So their resilience has increased, so the length of nap needed to alleviate that sleep pressure is just shortened as well. So when we understand how sleep regulates, it can give us this understanding a little bit more, right? So daytime sleep, I promise you, when we look at basic sleep biology and understanding how sleep regulates, daytime sleep is regulated by tiredness. So what about bedtime and nighttime? We have that sleep pressure that builds through the day, which we want it to build. to have appropriate pressure in the night. We also have the circadian rhythm and also the hormonal aspects of what happens with bedtime and nighttime sleep. So as I said, sleep pressure, we want the day to build the appropriate pressure. And that's where you can see sometimes too much volume of sleep, or that late nap that's alleviated a portion of that sleep pressure is now getting in the way, means, hey, suddenly bedtime and night goes a bit wacky. Okay. Now with the circadian rhythm obviously is quite complex, but at a sleep level, at a high level, we're going to just talk about this. Helps alert the body as to when sleep is needed for bedtime, we go to sleep, and when we wake up. Okay. And then hormones, you've probably heard of melatonin. Yeah. It's not a hormone that makes us sleep, but it can help us prepare for sleep. It is also linked to the circadian rhythm, but what we know contributes to the onset of melatonin is dim light, right? Dim light melatonin onset. It's a really awkward acronym called DILMO. So we know that the production of melatonin continues through the night and then peters off in the early hours, and it is then metabolized out of our system, and it doesn't continue in the day. So little hint here that melatonin has nothing to do with day sleep. And the way melatonin metabolizes out of our system, if anyone is going to have another baby, or you have friends, you can tell them that newborns are not flooded and drowning in their mother's melatonin. It's scientifically impossible for it to just linger in the system that way. So melatonin kind of does its thing, and then cortisol and melatonin have a bit of a relationship where they are in opposite of each other, and that's kind of our get up and go. There's a little bit of a secretion of this in that part of triggering of waking up in the morning. But you know, why is this important, right? If we can understand how at a very high level sleep regulates, this is the stuff that can help us go underneath the guides, underneath the routines, to truly understand our child's sleep. So I'm going to give you a few examples here, but not only does it help us understand, but it can help us detour around some of the misinformation, which, you know, is hard. Okay, so firstly, I mentioned melatonin in the day. Now, if anyone has a young baby and you've been, it's one of the myths I was going to bust, but let's just do it now. If you've been told your baby must have darkness in the day to protect their melatonin, darkness in the day, there is no melatonin in the day. You can have darkness in the day as a personal preference for your child, as a sleep cue, for helping with stimulation, and some babies really like that. But I know that there's many parents that are kind of trying to get any bit of light out of there with all the good intentions, because they've been told that we need to protect melatonin in the day for their day naps, but it doesn't have any part to play in day sleep. Okay, so when we understand how sleep regulates, we can kind of just detour. Okay, what about a time-based nap schedule, right? I'm so glad some of you are staying on for this juicy stuff. Now, this will relate more to those of you with children in a younger range, but again, it's just demonstrating that when we can truly understand sleep biology and sleep development, how it can help us with the journey with our own child. I'm often asked around, do I need to have a schedule for my child? Time-based naps, right? 6 a.m. you wake them up, 9 a.m. nap, 1 p.m. nap, and so on, set bedtime, etc. So there's two reasons why this is attractive, right? Firstly, there is a view that some parents are given that this is the best way to support your child's sleep, by having specific times in the day that children are meant to, all over the world, there are these set times that all babies sleep. Yeah. No evidence around that. It's one of the reasons why parents kind of go down this path. They're told that by doing this, you're going to make the best outcome for your baby. And also it can, at times create some predictability when things are challenging. But let's look at, again, just an example. Let's look at two kids, and let's say that, 6 a.m., wake them up. Now, I'm not like an anti-waker-upperer, depending on the age and depending on what's happening, right? Sometimes it just comes down to it's the most realistic decision for family logistics. You've got to get out the door at a certain time. It makes sense. But if your child's kind of a little bit here, a little bit there with their wake-up time, It's okay. It can help with the circadian rhythm if there's some challenges, but I think if it's not a challenge, you don't have to kind of go hard on it. But let's say this says you wake them at 6, and then, the first nap is at 9, and let's say the next nap's in the routine at 12:30. Okay, so let's say that they both just sleep at 9. Let's just ignore the fact that one of them or both of them may have a completely different way their sleep is regulating that day, right? It might be a very active morning. The sleep pressure may build more quickly. They've had a really rich sensory experience in the morning, the sensory diet. And despite the plan saying 9 o'clock, they might have actually wanted to sleep a bit earlier, or they might have a bit more energy, and we're then battling under tiredness at this magic 9 o'clock mark. But let's just assume that everything, all the stars aligned, and they both went to sleep at 9 o'clock. What then happens? Say one sleeps for half an hour and one sleeps for an hour and a half. Now, when we understand how sleep regulates, we would know that the child that woke up at 9:30, given that they were awake about 3 hours before sleeping, we would kind of say, well, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, maybe by 12:30, yeah, they'll be ready for a sleep. Now, if the guide does give a little bit of room for here and there, then great, because we have to accommodate for the variations in each unique child and that day. Fair enough. But the child that slept an hour and a half and then is now awake at 10:30, we can see that a couple of hours awake is probably not going to enable them to build the appropriate level of sleep pressure to be ready for a sleep at 12:30. Okay, so then what a lot of the guides will talk about is then wake them from the first nap to ensure that they're going to be ready for this 12:30 nap. So the question is, why? Are we doing that because it works best for our baby and our family? You might have children that you want to kind of coordinate their naps. A child that's on 1 nap, a child that's on 3 naps. You might want to try to coordinate that middle of the day nap to be somewhat similar. You might have activities that just kind of mean that your child only gets a half an hour sleep, and so they end up around this time of the day. Those things, great. But if it's because we're told there is something very magical about ensuring they sleep at these very set times, then in fact, sometimes we're getting in the way. Because when we wake a child, some will be okay with it, but others, they're going to be kind of carrying a sleep debt now. We've gotten in the way of their natural flow of how their body is regulating sleep. And sometimes this can really create more problems than we're trying to fix by having this idea of a time-based schedule. So my suggestion to parents when they talk to me about this is that a child's natural patterns often emerge more naturally once they're on 2 naps, and things just become a bit more predictable. Their circadian rhythms maturing. They tend to wake up same time. Their first nap of the day tends to be the same time. The length of the first nap tends to be very similar. So time-based schedules can ignore a lot of information when it comes to the evidence around sleep and how it regulates, okay? But again, if you found something that works perfectly for you, great. If you're doing it because you've been told there are these set windows that is when all babies are meant to sleep, just some food for thought, okay? So another way that you can use this understanding about sleep regulation is mini naps. You know, you're on your way home and your child just, pulling into the driveway and off they go. Like, no, stay awake, singing, windows are down. And you kind of think, well, they're really tired, so I'll just quickly get them into bed. And I don't know if you've experienced this. You get them into bed and ping, it's party time, right? So when we understand how sleep regulates, we can understand that little mini nap, even a few minutes, has alleviated some of that sleep pressure. And they're now in this zone where they'll probably wane sooner than they would, because it's just scooped off the top, but that they might just really resist going to sleep. So in that situation, you might decide, you know what, let's just get up, let's just do a little bit more. I'll observe you and see when I feel like you're now starting to wane, and we'll have another crack at it, right? Regulating, understanding how it regulates can be so powerful. I really wanted to talk about nap transitions, but I'm really going to be over time. So maybe what I'll do is, how about if you join the Sleep Village, I'm going to put together a special video to talk about how understanding sleep regulating can influence our understanding and support of nap transitions. Would that be fair? Because I'm really going over time and I can see the numbers are dwindling. So the last thing there is that, for example, 12-hour night. the expectation that children are meant to have a 12-hour night block. So when we understand how sleep regulates, and we can see that we need appropriate sleep pressure and a big picture view, right? There'll be some children, also against what the overall sleep recommendations are, that we can see that if we're trying to kind of push this idea that our child needs to sleep for 12 hours, some will, great. But with the expectation that that's the right length for night sleep for all babies, when we do understand the regulation of sleep, we can see that sometimes actually that earlier bedtime, they're just not ready for sleep. And we're kind of getting in the way there a little bit. And there's a real fear around later bedtimes, but sometimes it's the best choice. All right, so as I said, I won't talk about nap transitions, but I just want to quickly cover off 2 myths and then we're done. Restorative sleep, probably heard about it. So there's this idea that in order for your child to sleep, their sleep to be restorative, that it needs to have more than 1 sleep cycle. We're talking about day naps, right? And so there can be an intense pressure, particularly 1 nap of the day, for it to be a certain length of time in that middle of the day for it to be restorative. Now, when we look at the sleep cycle and the architecture of that cycle, as I said earlier, there are 3 phases of non-REM and REM sleep, right, in terms of overall basic structure. 3rd phase non-REM sleep is deep sleep. It's the slow wave, delta wave sleep that we benefit from. Every single sleep cycle, full sleep cycle, contains non-REM stage 3 sleep, deep sleep, restorative sleep. So I promise you, I have reached out to researchers and eminent sleep experts across the world to try to understand, where does this idea come from? Why is there this pressure for parents? Your child might do an hour for that nap and that's perfect for them if we look at all the other signs. And again, I have parents talking to me, I'm really worried they're not getting restorative sleep because they've slept 1 hour. It's not the length of time that they're meant to sleep. And there's this just arbitrary number out there. So I really encourage you to consider what's right for your baby, to know that restorative sleep can be 1 sleep cycle. And even there are times that less than a sleep cycle is a perfect length of time for your baby, again, when we understand how sleep regulates. The final one is your baby won't develop if they don't get enough sleep. Again, a very common fear with parents. Absolutely, sleep is critical for development. But can I tell you a secret? I'm yet to meet a family whose child is actually out of normal range for total overall sleep volumes. Usually it's that the flow of sleep, the distribution of naps and other things are getting in the way. But parents are frequently really pleasantly surprised to know their child's range is actually fairly normal. So we're creating a lot of fear unnecessarily. But secondly, the research that they have done, which talks about the long-term developmental impacts, whether it's ADHD, obesity, aggression challenges, and so on, are actually school-age children and sleep deprivation challenges. And I think it's really unfair to take that information and say, if your child misses a nap or they're half an hour late for bed or miss even an hour of sleep, that their development is now, they're not going to walk properly, they're not going to learn how to talk. I just think, again, we don't need to make it harder than it already is. Okay, so just a few sleep myths there. I'm so glad that I can see a few of you still there. And I hope you have enjoyed this session. Please, I would love to hear your thoughts on what your key takeaways have been from this. If you do feel I'm someone that you connect with, I would love to wrap my arms around you and your family if you would like some support with sleep. It really, I know, I take so much joy in helping things feel calmer and easier. And I hope you can see the benefit of going deeper. I hope you can see the benefit of, whether that middle zone is more where you feel comfortable to sit, where you can support your little one. So if there's any way I can be of help, remember, I'm here, and I'm going to sign off. Thank you for joining me. It's been lovely to be able to connect with you, although I don't get to see your beautiful faces. All right, take care. Good night.